time for yet another installment of the How Good Is Your Team series. It's time that we highlight the Philadelphia Fusion's offseason and evaluate how we all think they did. And of course, we'll finish this thing off with a little team preview as well as my general expectations for them. The Philly Fusion had a pretty brutal offseason from the fan perspective. It seemed rather mentally draining and there was a whole lot to process, so that means that we should not be wasting any time. Let's get right into this thing. Before getting into what they lost, I suppose I should quickly highlight that the Fusion are going to be competing in Asia this year, and I welcome this decision from the entertainment standpoint. They should add some needed spice to that region, but of course, tighter competition comes along with this transition, so their season could be a bit tougher compared to last year. More on that later. For now, we're going to discuss their player and coaching departures. And let me tell you, there was a lot. I mean, a lot of them. Philly seriously might have had the toughest offseason out of all teams. To get the not-so-bad one out of the way first, I suppose, they decided to say goodbye to Boombox after 3 seasons. As an OG member of the Fusion, he's been through all of the ups and downs. I'm sure Philly fans will be forever grateful for his efforts. However, it's not someone I expect them to totally miss. First off, he was a bench player anyway at this point. But 2, his value as a player has tremendously decreased since the inaugural season. Flex support has grown so much over these last few years, so he doesn't bring as much to the table these days. Sure, he showed some decent performances during double flex support compositions this year, but Philly could definitely do better if they feel a need to get another flex support. Because, spoiler alert, they still don't have another one on the roster as of this recording, so clearly they aren't too concerned, or at least they're taking their time to search, if anything. So yeah, no more Boombox. Only Poco, EQO, and Carpe remain of that original Season 1 team now. But anyway, the next person to leave would start the huge amount of pain to come. That's right, I'm talking about Chipsa. I can't believe they got rid of this guy. The Fusion just lost the best player ever. But in all seriousness, we all saw this coming. Chipsa coming to Philly was a PR move. They had no real use for him, plus Chipsa's probably better off just streaming all the time anyway. With memes aside, the painful offseason truly began when it was announced that KDG would be moving on to new opportunities. To this day, I still cannot believe something like this could happen. I'm not exactly sure what went wrong, but it is very disappointing to see him go because KDG did such a great job last year. Sure, he had a lot of help from his crazy good team around him, but he utilized all of his guys perfectly. He looked like a genius when deciding to play around Sato instead of somebody like Carpe so much. So many players in general seem to play up to their potential in his system. The Fusion posted consistent results for the first time in franchise history under KDG. Moving on from him gives this franchise a feeling of uncertainty moving forward. How are they going to replicate that level of success? Even the most elite coaches are going to have a difficult time doing so, and that's the truth of the matter. Keeping the pain train rolling, the Fusion saw 3 of their big stars all pursue new opportunities in free agency. Sato would join KDG on the Toronto Defiant, Fury signed with the Washington Justice, and Ivy left for the NYXL. This was the point where I was really starting to feel for Philly fans. That's literally half of a starting lineup from last year, and I would say they all could be considered major losses. After patiently waiting for him to realize his potential for 2 years, Sato finally started to play at a superstar level during 2020. Behind some amazing support, he had a top-tier season. He asserted dominance and proved doubters like myself wrong. After all the backlash and criticism, staying patient with Sato finally started to bear some fruit. And now he's gone, just like that. He left them to keep playing under KDG, and that is absolutely brutal if you're a Philly fan. And how about the other half of that amazing tank line? Fury was a top-tier tank as well in 2020. Acquiring Fury from the London Spitfire seemed like a match made in heaven. He provides a lot of needed firepower at the off-tank position, and there's reason to believe he could stay here long-term since he has a good relationship with Carpe. Fury is a world-class player, and he provided consistency across all metas and always made sure to come up big when the team needed him to. Replacing that short-term is practically impossible, and it leaves a gaping hole in the Fusion tank line. It's worth noting that they acquired no new off-tanks as of this recording either, which means that Poco is going to be their guy for the foreseeable future. And while Poco is solid, it still hurts Philly's ability to compete at the highest level possible. Going from Fury to anybody else is almost guaranteed to be a downgrade. Oh, and speaking of downgrades, Flex DPS finds itself in a very similar predicament. Ivy really came into his own last year after getting acquired from Toronto in a trade. He realized his true potential and was playing with a lot of confidence, and you could feel his presence pretty much any time he was in the game. He played with dominance on characters like Mei, Hanzo, and Genji, and he took a lot of pressure off Carpe and Hisu to perform. The responsibilities felt very split. He provided a lot of needed stability. So to go from him to EQO is a tough pill to swallow. They weren't able to get a suitable replacement to help maintain a super competitive edge. The final guy to leave would be Hisu, who also joined the Defiant. While Carpe is the team's primary hit scan, Hisu is going to be missed for a few different reasons. For one, he had a pretty high ceiling, but two, and more importantly too, he covered Carpe's weaknesses very well. I love Carpe to death, but there are certain characters he's not amazing on, like Reaper and Sombra, and Hisu happened to be extremely effective on those heroes, so it was a perfect match. The utility is going to be missed greatly, I feel. Okay, so that's everything. Yes, I know Philly fans, that is very tough to look back on because those are some hefty losses. But let's see what you guys did to compensate. So they started by addressing the empty head coaching position. The new coach of the Fusion was announced to be 9K. To me, he feels like a somewhat capable replacement. As a descendant of Krusty, he helped the Shock win the 2019 championship. And look what he did under a management position for the Paris Eternal. 9K has a lot going for him, he has a pretty decent reputation. But even so, there's no guarantee of success, I feel. It's the same as Junkbuck and Arachne, you know? There's reason to feel confident, sure, but they aren't proven as head coaches just yet at the Overwatch League level. There's upside, but also a big time risk factor. You should of course give him a chance, but it's understandable if you feel concerned. Next would be the highlight, at least for most people, of the Fusion's free agency when they acquired Mono from the NYXL. While Mono is very good, it feels like a side grade compared to Sato. In my opinion, Sato was a tiny bit better impact-wise last year. It's close though, so honestly, it's really not a terrible way to compensate for the loss of Sato. They're not losing much here. Mono helps you ensure you're not going to see a major decrease in performance at the main tank position because he can literally be just as good on most of the characters that Sato played. To be completely honest, there might be times where Mono is better suited for this team. Take Wrecking Ball for example. Mono was one of the best in the league on him last year. The other cool thing to keep in mind is that Mono might be even better on Philly than he was on New York. It's very much possible. It's important to remember that Mono was a carry while usually not receiving a lot of the resources on New York. If the Fusion continue to utilize a similar system to last year, Mono could get a similar treatment to Sato, and if that's the case, Mono might be able to pull off some crazy stuff this year. But even if the Fusion decide not to utilize that same system, he could still generally be more enabled since Alarm and Funny Astro are a stronger support line than Jonek and Animo were last year. So honestly, some people might even call this an upgrade. Mono should be pretty good no matter what though. The one thing that maybe scares me a little bit though is him playing under an English-speaking roster for the first time. Mono's been on full Korean teams his entire career up until this point, so I'm not sure how much of a hindrance that will have on his communication. Even if he proves to be decent at English, it still could take a while to get used to that transition, and if that's the case, we could see some early struggles that cost Philly some games while they figure some things out synergy-wise. The other move Philly made this offseason was signing Shockwave out of free agency. I find myself intrigued with this one. From a pure ceiling perspective, it's a downgrade compared to Hisu, I feel, but it's still not a terrible pickup. Shockwave showed that he is capable of great things, and being part of a better team could help him get to that level. He helps make up for some of that pop-off potential that was lost when Ivy left in particular. Him and Carpe should be really good together in any sort of double sniper or Tracer Widow Ashe composition. But what kind of value can he get outside of those things? Maybe he could play Echo, even though EQO is pretty good on her too. It's my hope though that he can also be a good Sombra and or Reaper for them. If the coaches can get him to improve on those heroes, that would be fantastic. It would make the loss of Hisu not as bad. He's never really been known for either of those characters though, like ever, so I'm not too sure what to expect. Shockwave is a pickup which excites me, but also makes me feel kind of nervous. I'm pretty torn. On that note, that's the Philly offseason in a nutshell. In all honesty, I'm not happy right now. Their ability to stay at the top has been greatly hindered. They lost a lot of valuable assets but barely got anything to replace them. They're down to a 7-man roster now, and even if their budget were to be a problem or something, that still doesn't really excuse being unable to do any better than EQO and Poco as your replacements for your lost top-tier flex DPS and off-tank. Don't get me wrong, they still do have a decent roster, and they are by no means bad, but downgrades are still downgrades. They lost that edge that made them elite, I feel, and how can I expect them to finish in the top 5 or better this year because of something like that? Between losing 4 of their core players and their head coach, I'm giving the Fusion a C- as their offseason grade. There were no clear-cut upgrades to be found this offseason. I think that getting Mono and Shockwave as compensation is nice, but there's still so many heavy losses that they weren't able to address. To replace Ivy and Fury with EQO and Poco is what seriously kills me here. They aren't bad players by any stretch of the imagination, but there's no way we can sit here and say the Fusion have some of the best odds to compete for a title now. Between their downgrades and a lot of other teams greatly improving, they've taken a fall from grace. I know I'm being really harsh on them here, but it's very disappointing. They were one of the top teams in the league last year, so I expected more out of them in order to maintain that edge to stay at the top. Clearly, they failed to lure in any sort of big-name free agents, and now they have to suffer the consequences. So to start my outlook and team preview of these guys, I wanted to say that the road to a Grand Finals victory is of course going to be a lot more challenging now. Don't get me wrong, I think this Fusion team still could have a relatively solid season because there's a lot of star power present there still, despite all of the losses. Carpe, Alarm, Mono, and Funny Astro, that's a great core. They're all top-tier players at their respective positions. But the team as a whole no longer feels super elite like they used to. They should be able to compete with a majority of the teams in Asia, but there's not a lot of guaranteed success like last year because they're very beatable now. They're going to be susceptible to a lot more upset losses. That's what happens when you don't have ridiculous star power at every position. You fall back down to earth a little bit. They have a strong core, but EQO and Poco do make for exploitable weaknesses against the top tier competition simply because I don't know if they'll be able to keep up. Thinking about it logically, Poco is still good on D.Va and Zarya, but what about his Sigma? Can I reasonably expect it to be anywhere near as good as Fury's, let's say? It feels unrealistic to me. And what about EQO off Genji or maybe Echo? Will he even have a use for this team outside of those two characters? Can he be anywhere close to what Ivy was on a character like Mei? Probably not, right? Projectile is not in a great state right now, so he's really going to have to tap into some of that Season 1 magic and pick up some more useful heroes. I have concerns about the Fusion having no backup supports on the roster as well. I really hope the Fusion makes some sort of move before the start of the season because double Flexibor compositions could really hurt them. Funny Astro is a very talented player, but you would definitely get more value out of having someone a bit stronger on the Baptiste in the game like what we saw from Boombox. It's another way in which the Fusion will be at a disadvantage against their competition. I have some concerns over their overall hero coverage as well. In particular, I'm terrified of what might happen in a Sombra meta. Carpe has never been known for this character, plus you probably want him on something else anyway, so it's going to be up to Shockwave and or EQO to figure it out because Asia loves their Sombra. Think about how much more often they played her last year compared to North America. Her and Sigma could be huge problems for Philly this year. So in terms of my expectations for this Philly team, I believe they are going to finish anywhere from 9th through 5th place in the overall standings. While I still do think they're absolutely top half of the league, things could get dicey if a lot of my fears end up coming true. Simply lacking that consistency from their former stars and coach could leave them being unable to finish teams off a bit more often. A lot of these APAC teams are well-rounded and they could take advantage of their potential holes, but at the same time, it's within reason to believe the Fusion could still have a very, very respectable season if their big stars pop off and their potential weaknesses play well enough. They could still be a very threatening roster. Listen, when you have Carpe, Alarm, Funny Astro, and Mono all on the same team, it's within reason to believe you're going to be in most games you play. There's a lot of clutch potential in that one lineup. The Fusion are still primed to be a decent squad, just not so much in the realm of title contender status anymore, I feel. I fear that they may revert back to their old ways a little bit, where they can't seem to establish consistency. There's quite a few question marks when it comes to their coaching, specific positions, and certain characters that they're going to have to play. I'm very interested to see if the Fusion can prove me wrong. Should be a fun year. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. That's another offseason recap and team preview in the books. So how are you feeling about the Fusion currently? Are you nervous for them like me? Or do you have a bit more optimism? Leave a comment down below and let's get this discussion going. And while you're at it, consider giving this video a like and subscribing if you're interested in staying up to date with this series. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.